The hallway was dim, lit only by the fractured light of the moon slipping through the blinds. I had been lying awake for over an hour, the fan circling above doing little to silence the restlessness in my mind. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with a silence that wasn't quite still. From my room, I heard it, a sound, faint but rhythmic, coming from down the hall that my mother's room. At first, I thought it was the house settling. It was old, prone to creaks and murmurs when the temperature dropped. But this was different. There was a pattern to the noise, a soft thump, followed by the rustle of sheets or maybe clothing. Then, a low, muffled voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Intimate. Urgent. That I sat up slowly, bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. My fingers brushed against the nightstand as I reached for my phone, not to check the time, but for something to anchor me. The screen read 1:47 a.m. The house should have been silent. My father was away on business, he often was. Long weeks in Seoul, sometimes Tokyo. He rarely called. When he did, it was brief, transactional. My mother always smiled politely, even when she thought no one was watching. That I padded quietly into the hall, the sound growing clearer with each step. A breathless whisper. A sudden gasp. My hand froze mid-air, inches from her doorframe. That I shouldn't be here, but I didn't leave. The door was mostly shut, just slightly ajar. The sliver of light spilling out into the hallway pulsed softly. I leaned closer, my breath held, ears straining. I heard it again, that voice. Low, masculine, unfamiliar, not my father's. The realization was slow, like warm honey dripping through my thoughts. Confusion first. Then something darker, something that sat in my chest like a stone. I couldn't see anything, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Memories flooded in. Dinners where she barely spoke. Her smile that no longer reached her eyes. The perfume that lingered even on days she hadn't left the house. The way she looked out the window long after the sun had gone down. The thump of the headboard against the wall broke through my thoughts, quickening. Then stillness. That I stepped back into the shadows, heart thudding, mind blank. I wasn't sure what I had heard, or what it meant. All I knew was that it wasn't supposed to be happening, not in her room. Not while he was gone. Not with someone else. That I retreated to my room in silence, the hallway stretching behind me like a secret I wasn't meant to carry. As I lay back down, staring into the darkness, one thought pulsed louder than all the others. That I knew that voice didn't belong to my father, and I couldn't unhear it. Sleep never came that night. I lay still, eyes open, trying to make sense of the sounds, the voice, the emotion that clung to every muffled whisper. Morning arrived with a gray, reluctant light. I heard her in the kitchen, quiet as always, humming softly. As if nothing had changed, but everything had. That I watched her from the hallway, hidden by the angle of the wall. She stood at the stove, wearing the same robe she always wore, ivory silk, delicately embroidered. Her hair was tied up loosely, a few strands falling into her face. She moved with practiced calm, like someone who'd lived 1,000 mornings in silence. Yet something was different. Her shoulders weren't as stiff. Her eyes, when they glanced toward the window, held a softness I hadn't seen in years. That my mother had always been beautiful, though she never seemed to care. She rarely wore makeup, favored simple clothing, and smiled only when she remembered to. My father used to say she was quietly elegant. But over time, the elegance had turned brittle. I'd seen it in the way she flinched at his raised voice, the way she stared too long at the front door when he was late. They used to laugh together. I remember that, barely. I was younger then, too young to understand the weight people carry when love becomes routine. Or when it disappears. The arguments began subtly. Not shouting, but something colder, resentful silence, missed glances, dinners eaten at different times. Then came the business trips. First occasional. Then frequent. He always said it was necessary. That he was doing it for us, but my mother never asked him to go. Did I remember the first time I noticed her change? It was last winter. She started dressing differently, even when she wasn't going anywhere. She started walking in the evenings, sometimes taking the long way around the neighborhood. Once, I saw her speaking to Mr. Hahn, the neighbor who always offered to help with groceries. They weren't standing too close, but her smile, it was real. That I never saw him come into the house, but now I wondered that I sat at the kitchen table, and she poured me tea like she always did. She didn't say much. Just asked if I slept well. I lied. She nodded, eyes downcast, stirring her cup even though she hadn't added anything to it. There was a tenderness in her voice that morning, a lightness I hadn't heard in a long time. It scared me. Not because she seemed happy, but because I finally realized how long she had been pretending not to feel at all. That I didn't ask who he was. Not yet. Some part of me wasn't ready to hear the truth. Another part already knew. As I looked at her from across the table, one question echoed louder than the rest: what if she had found someone who simply saw her? The following nights passed in a delicate tension, quiet, but never still. I moved through the house like a shadow, hyper-aware of every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of expression on my mother's face. She behaved normally, as if the night I heard everything had never happened. But something inside me had shifted. That I began to watch her more closely. There were little things. Her phone, once left on countertops and coffee tables, was now always within reach. She checked it often, though never when I was in direct sight. A small smile would flicker across her lips, soft, private, as if summoned by a distant voice. She had never smiled like that at my father, at least not in recent memory. One morning, I found her in the living room before sunrise, sitting cross-legged on the couch, cradling an old photo album. Her fingers traced the edges of a picture I couldn't see. She didn't hear me approach. She whispered a name, too faint to catch, but it wasn't my father's. She closed the book when she noticed me, gave a tight smile, and asked if I wanted breakfast. That I said no. That night, I stayed awake on purpose. The house fell into silence again, deeper this time, like it had been waiting for something. Just after 2, the familiar sound returned. Not loud, but unmistakable. The creak of her bed. The faint hum of breath. The rhythm of 2 people sinking without words. That I didn't move. Instead, I watched from my window. The back gate opened slowly, almost cautiously. A figure emerged from the side of the house, tall, lean, wrapped in a long coat. He moved with care, like someone who had done this before, many times. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. He knew no one was supposed to see him, but I did. He stepped into the darkness, swallowed by it, leaving behind only the memory of his presence, and my mother's silence. The kind of silence that speaks too much. The next morning, she was radiant. Subtle, but undeniable. Her skin had color, her movements were fluid, effortless. She hummed while slicing fruit. There was no apology in her demeanor, no trace of shame, and maybe that's what confused me most. Was it wrong to see her this way and feel relief? I remembered the man's silhouette, familiar, though I couldn't place it. Not a stranger. Not entirely. My mind sifted through memories like dust in an attic, but nothing settled. Later that day, I heard her speaking softly into the phone behind her closed door. The tone was gentle, hesitant. "You know we can't keep doing this," she whispered, and yet, something in her voice said she would. She chose silence. And so did I. For now, because some truths aren't shouted. Some are whispered in the quiet moments between guilt and longing, and I was still listening. I never spoke of what I saw. Not to her. Not to him. The secret sat between us like a third presence in the house, invisible but dense, shaping every glance, every silence. Time moved on as if it hadn't noticed. My father returned 3 days later. He greeted my mother with the same detached affection he always did, an arm draped over her shoulder, a quick peck on the cheek. She smiled, gently, and poured his coffee without meeting his eyes. They made small talk over breakfast. He talked about meetings and long flights. She nodded, said that must have been exhausting, and passed him the sugar. There was no spark. Only duty. That I watched her closely, searching for signs of guilt, regret, even hesitation. But what I saw was something else entirely: restraint. A woman who had once mourned the love that left, and then quietly found something to replace it. Not out of rebellion, but survival. That I never caught the man again. He didn't return, at least not when I was watching. Maybe the affair had ended, or maybe it had simply gone deeper underground. But in her movements, in the softness that returned to her voice, I knew he was still somewhere. Not in the room, but in her, and still, I said nothing, because some confrontations don't offer closure. Some truths, once spoken, only break more than they meant. The months passed. Seasons folded into one another like worn pages. I moved out that summer, claiming independence. But the truth was simpler: I couldn't keep living beside something I didn't understand. That I visited less frequently after that. But when I did, I saw the same quiet routine. My father still traveled. My mother still smiled. The house remained clean and hollow. Years later, I returned for a weekend visit. I was older, colder maybe. She was waiting by the window when I arrived, a teacup in hand, staring at nothing. Her robe was different, but the softness in her eyes remained. We didn't hug. We never really did. That night, as I walked past her room, there were no sounds. No whispers. Just silence, but it was a different silence now, not the kind born from loneliness or longing, but the kind left behind when something once full had emptied itself completely. That I stood there for a moment, listening. Not for noises this time, but for memories. Echoes. I heard none. Maybe it had ended. Maybe it had burned itself out, as some love affairs do, not in betrayal, but in quiet understanding. A chapter written in secret, read only by two hearts who needed something more than obligation. That I never asked her about it. She never offered, and yet, sometimes, when I think of her sitting in the dark with a cup of tea and her memories, I wonder if what she found was love, or simply the absence of silence. That I and the end, perhaps they are not so different.